Order of a workshop meeting of the Weaverville Town Council on February 15, the day after Thanksgiving Day in 2022. Welcome and glad everyone is here. Tonight's agenda is to hear from David Hill, as a consultant who we have hired to do a pay study for the town of Weaverville, and to also hear some recommendations from our town manager about suggestions that she may have for the upcoming budget season and how that may relate to pay for our staff. And we do not intend to take any action tonight, but do hope that we will need to give the town manager some direction on how she should put that budget together with regard to staff salaries and other staff costs. So welcome and thank you for being here. And I think the first thing is to call on David Hill. I don't see David on my list here. David, are you here? Was one of these numbers I don't recognize?
Yes.
David is here. I'm not sure which number he is, but here is his screen. Thank you, David, for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you, can't take it, my spouse would like one.
My pleasure to be here with you tonight. The last time I was with you was virtually, and during that virtual meeting, we presented a whole lot of information, a lot of detailed information about processes, procedures, different recommendations. I'm here tonight to talk to you more specifically about the recommendation that we'll be making, and of course to answer any questions that you have. I do have a short PowerPoint that we'll look at. So we're going to be talking about the option that we have chosen because we want to be able to address Weaverville's competitive positioning with the local market. We want to talk about and address employee recruitment, followed very closely by employee retention, and the recommended pay plan that we have addresses the living wage, establishes a living wage plan that we're going to present to you. The competitive positioning, when I took a look at all of your positions, all of your classifications compared to the same or similar classifications in all those local governments that we looked at, I found that you did have a number of positions that were already at market. You had a lot of employees whose salaries were at market, but you also had a number of positions and employees whose the position itself was not in a good, favorable position to the market, and employee salaries were not either. Employee recruitment, talking to the department directors, talking to the manager, you, like a lot of other local governments, have difficulty in recruiting specific kinds of candidates for specialized classifications. Hopefully, what we're going to bring to you tonight is going to address some of that. Employee retention, when I looked at all of that data, I found that over 50% of your employees have been with you less than 5 years. Okay, next slide. So here's the specific recommendation that I'll be bringing to you. After looking at all those different classifications, comparing those to the same or similar classifications in that market group of local governments, my recommendation is that you approve moving each of those classifications to the pay grade that has the pay grade range commensurate with the market. So the average. We looked at the median, we looked at the average, but the information will bring you up to a favorable position within the market. And individual employee salaries will be set at a comp ratio formula, a comp ratio model that assigns a mathematical value to length of time in current position. So that's just a mathematical formula that keys on the midpoint of a salary grade range. And that midpoint, if you look at all the market data, is the market value of each of those classifications. So the recommendation would be to place each position in the pay grade commensurate with the market. Then look at each individual salary, individual employee salary. And when it is not in that correct place according to the formula that I use, their salary would be adjusted to that point up to the midpoint. Now I stopped the formula calculation at the midpoint. The focus was to get employee salaries up to the market value of their position. And of course, there were some employees whose salaries are already above that. So part of the recommendation, of course, is not to reduce anybody's salary, but to move them to the comp ratio position on the pay grade range or their current salary, whichever is greater. Now, of course, there are pros and cons to every option that I bring. This option places you in a very competitive positioning to the average market. No greater than, no less than. Placing employees' salaries in relation to the length of time that they've been in their current position. The thing with that is that at the same time, out of both sides of my mouth, I would say that it either abates or contributes to salary compression, or it doesn't. It's just a reshuffling of salaries and relationships of individual employees based on how long they've been working with you in their current position. Now, the bold line, as you can see on the presentation, is the cost of this particular recommendation. Approximately $81,000. The majority of that is salaries, but there's about 25% of payroll associated costs. That's FICA, retirement, 401k, and so forth. But down at the bottom of that slide, the outcomes of this particular recommendation is that you will have about 40 employees whose salaries are already within the parameters of the formula that I use. So said another way, you'll have about 41 employees who will receive no salary increase because of this particular recommendation. And then in the last line, you can see that of those employees who are receiving adjustments, the average adjustment is a little over $900. So that very quickly was an explanation of that particular option that we're bringing to you tonight.
Are we ready for questions? Patrick, you are on mute.
And that is the new greeting in the 21st century, right? You're muted. Please unmute. Excuse me. Thank you, David. And for those of you who are on the meeting, you should know that David had presented some preliminary findings to the council at last month's workshop. So we'd already seen a lot of the data that he is referring to tonight at an earlier meeting. So you're not getting the full and complete picture that he's presenting this evening. You've heard our consultant's recommendation. I'm curious as to what questions council members might have of Mr. Hill.
You may not know the answer to this, David, Selena may have to help me. I'm not surprised that 50% are less than 5 years because we added a lot of people to the fire department. How many people have retired in the last 5 years? Do we know that? Because they automatically have to be replaced.
Yes, ma'am. I'm gonna go ahead and send this, pass this around to you. I did send this out to you ahead of time. This is the worker turnover information. And so if you look in the last 5 years for just retirements alone, we see 9, I believe, if I counted those ID numbers correct. 9. If you look on the third line down, retirements, and just go straight across there, I'm counting 9 that have retired since 2017.
Okay. And then, I know we added about 6 or 8 to the fire department within the last 5 years.
Yeah.
And so what's the number, David or Selena, the number that, if there's 41 that would not need an increase, how many is the number that would? Is it 29? Is that stuck in my head?
29, that's correct. And once I get into my part of the presentation, I can share a little more with you about what those positions are.
And I didn't see a whole lot of turnover, because I know I'm one of the people who asked that question the last time. So I would be curious, and maybe nobody else is curious about this, but I would be curious, instead of a 5-year mark, what's a 2-year mark? How many people's been less than 2 years with us?
I don't know that we'll have that tonight.
That's fine, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. But I think you're right, Catherine. One thing that I thought was interesting and positive about the report we saw today with our retention rate is that our turnover rate is actually pretty low over the whole 5-year period. So that's a very positive thing. Obviously, Weaverville is a good place to work. So, are there any other questions that council members have of Mr. Hill?
Yeah, Patrick, this is Jeff, got a couple. We talked at the last meeting about the couple anomalies of other municipalities that had very high salaries. West Buncombe was one, and there was another I don't recall. And we talked about the concept of maybe throwing those two out from an analysis as anomalies. Are these with all the regions that you had, or? Okay. Yeah. What does that look like if you took, like, say, those 1 or 2 out of the picture?
Well, obviously it did have some effect.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. The other question, I think we talked around this before too. How many of the people that we've got in the departments, how many different positions for X number of people do we have? You know, like in the fire department, X number of positions for X number of people. Trying to get an idea.
Per capita, is that?
Yeah.
Okay, we can get that for you.
Okay, because, you know, there's a right size of that, and, you know, we should always be looking at streamlining our structure in addition to our top as well. So that's something I'd like to know a little bit more about as well.
I'll follow up on your question there. If we look at something like the fire department, we have to remember, they cover all of North Buncombe, rather just a town, city, so
Right.
that makes it somewhat more difficult to compare towns of our size versus us taking care of the whole north end, number 5 we have.
Yeah, no, I heard you, Doug. I'm not talking about their responsibility. I'm just talking about different job titles and descriptions, you know, which is really advancement. And I'm just making this up. If we've got 8 positions and then you got 10 people, well, those two things are out of whack.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying we have that dynamic, but I know a couple of them we might. So it might be an opportunity too.
Happy to bring that information back in.
And so for those who didn't understand, so In a previous discussion with David, we looked at the comparisons of our benefits and salaries compared to other municipalities. And there were a couple of municipalities who were really outliers who had either a particularly low or particularly high salaries, which kind of skewed the results. And so that's what Jeff was referring to. So.
Yeah, and then one last question. In the materials that Selena sent around, there was a release by, and I forget their name, that nonprofit that does the living wage analysis, and they were making a recommendation to the county that gives us 17.8, I think. Which is a big jump, and as far as I know, kind of off the charts compared to other areas of the country. I don't have any feel for how much weight that recommendation on a whole or what credibility they have, but I mean, did that come into your play, David, or are you just looking at it compared to other municipalities?
The only adjustment I made in your pay plan was the very minimum salary is set at $15 an hour.
Okay.
Did you do any additional work to relate to the turnovers versus the employees that were not up to the salary rate you expected? Was one of the things you mentioned about the market, of course, if we're under it, people will leave and go to other places. From the statistics here, did you find any that was correlated with turnover versus the percent that was less than average?
We did not ask, if I may add, jump in here, we did not ask David to do any type of analysis of exit interviews. That is one thing that I believe is important and that we will start doing, is doing some form of exit interview to determine why folks are leaving. I can tell you anecdotally, in the last several situations, I've actually asked the department head and have spoken with them about those things, and so I'm happy to share those. I'm not prepared to share all of that information with you tonight, as I simply just don't have it all in my head right now. But we did not, that was not a part of what we asked Mr. Hill to analyze in his review.
Are there other questions that council may have of Mr. Hill? Hearing none, Town Manager Coffey, would you please give us your analysis and your recommendations?
Yes, sir. And, good evening to you all. I'm going to share my screen here again, take you through some of the information you've heard before, but go ahead and take you through my recommendations to you with regard to the compensation study implementation. Just a little bit of background, and again, some of this information you have already heard from me. It has been almost 11 years since the town has done a comprehensive compensation classification study. There does exist some irregular increments between salary grades in our current schedule, pay schedule ranges and classifications due to increases at lower grades to implement the living wage. So back a little bit more information to address your question earlier, Vice Mayor McKenna. Town Council did, I believe it was 2 fiscal years ago, asked that we begin looking at the living wage and incorporating that into the recommendations within the budget. So that was at that point in time important to Town Council to continue to go with that information. So just a little bit of historical background there. And that is why I do continue to bring that forward to you to let you know what those numbers continue to be as we move forward. Typically, there should be about 5% of a salary decrease between grades. This has, in our case, been eroded over the last 10 years. 10 years is a very long time to wait for having a study of this nature. And I think Mr. Hill can probably give us some advice on that after I finish, if we want to talk to him about how that happens and why it happens and what the best practice is in that regard. Many of I will share with you that in speaking with colleagues in our neighboring jurisdictions and in those that were studied as a part of this study, there are several jurisdictions that are in the process or very soon will be in the process of implementing new pay studies. This, I believe, will put further pressure on our pay scales. I can name off 3 right now. Hendersonville has been in the news, was in the news yesterday regarding a 580,000, I believe, right at $500,000 that their compensation study was recommending. That passed 3-2 in their jurisdiction. Buncombe County is in the process, as well as the city of Asheville, also in the process of implementing pay studies. Unfortunately, that information was not available to us, so Mr. Hill was not able to pull all of that information at the time to put into our study. So at this point, we could be behind already. It's just very difficult to tell without having that information from them. The current study does reveal that market adjustments are necessary, in not all, but in some positions. And these are mostly the lower level positions. And I want to take you to a little bit more of detail here and talk to you about those. So as you see there, 41 employees in the current recommendation, 41 employees of our 70 counted in this study will see no increase. So that's 59%. That's the largest chunk of our employees. The next area, and I'm gonna go from the bottom left up and just share you information there. Less than 8 employees of those 29 that are proposed to receive an increase will receive 1,000 or less. And that's an annual on an annual basis. I can tell you that based on the study, those positions, 2 of those positions are public works positions, 6 of them are fire department positions. The next up, which is the 7%, and these are those that would receive a $1,000 to $2,000 annual increase. One of them is a police officer, one is an equipment operator at Public Works, and 3 are maintenance workers at Public Works. The next line up, 7 employees at the 10% mark to propose to receive $2,000 to $3,000 increase. That's 7 employees. And of those, there's 1 police officer, 4 firefighters, 1 captain, and 1 lieutenant in the fire department. Moving on to the next line, which is the 7% mark, there are 5 employees, and this is the $3,000 to $4,000 increase proposed, and 2 of those are fire captains, 3 are maintenance workers. And then, so that, I think that covers, no, I've got one more here. The final from $4,000 to $4,500 increase, that's 4 employees. One of those is a firefighter, one is an equipment operator with Public Works, another is a maintenance worker with Public Works, and one is with the water treatment plant. So that gives you, I feel like that gives you a better idea of what kinds of positions that we're recommending here with this pay study. This is another breakdown of the positions for the increases, so that shows you essentially what I just shared with you, and I apologize, I misspelled supervisor there, and you just saw it. That's usually the way it works, is when it's live, you notice it, so I apologize for that. But that shows you another breakdown of the information that I just shared with you. The really important thing that I think we need to think about, and you as town council need to talk about this and think about it as we go into the budget process, is that this option is $81,000. And that 81,000 actually includes your FICA, your benefits, your retirement system pieces, that kind of thing. So there's only roughly 65,000 of that is actually true salary dollars going into the paychecks of our employees. That is not a lot. It is in fact roughly 1.3% of our total personnel budget. It's not a huge increase. One of the options that we considered early on, Mr. Hill gave us, I believe it was 4 options. One of those, correct me if I'm wrong, but I want to say it was right around 280,000. So 280,000 was the price tag on that one. I didn't feel like it was appropriate. I didn't feel like any of the others were appropriate, and that's why we brought that back to you at the option that I feel is appropriate. So a little bit more about the information from the group is called Just Economics out of Buncombe County. They provide the information on the living wage. Town council gave direction during the 21-22 budget year to implement a $15.80 or $32,864 annual living wage. So when we look at living wage, we can't only look at it from the hourly wage standpoint, we have to also look at it from the annual standpoint. So it's important to remember that $32,864 is in accordance with Just Economics annual wage for 2021. So just recently, and I think I shared this with you all, just recently, Just Economics did their calculations, brought forward to make public that the living wage in 2022 has risen to $17.70 per hour, or again, another annual $36,816. I will share with you that the town manager and town attorney pay is not included in the figure that has been presented for the precise reason that we are not included in the pay scale. Our positions have never been included in the pay scale because we are appointed directly by you as town council. So those are not, our positions are not included there. It is my understanding that Mr. Hill has provided that information to Mayor Fitzsimmons, and you all may already have it, I don't know. But it's my understanding that that information has indeed been passed along. Finally, my recommendations to you, I would like some, obviously, we're in the process of developing a budget. We do have to have that budget complete and balanced by and adopted by you by June 30th. We have already started that process. Department heads are in the process now of preparing their budget requests. Those are due the first week of March to me. I'll begin in assimilating that information, working with Tanya to come up with our revenue projections for the upcoming year. With personnel costs being the largest expense in, I would say, virtually any budget, any organizational budget at least, you can imagine that this is important for me to have some input from you on. And so what I've asked for tonight is consensus to direct me to include the roughly 81,000, I can't remember the exact number there, but 81,000 that has been proposed for this option to be included within the budget to be effective July 1. In addition to that, I would propose to you that in January, not right away, but in January of 2023, that town council consider moving to the new living wage, which is the $17.70 or the annual $36,816. One other thing that I would want to do, and I think it's important for us to do it at this point in time, is especially as we look at salaries and we look at classifications and pay scales, and also going back to Vice Mayor McKenna's comments about the number of employees per capita, those types of things. I started my career in budget as a budget analyst, and so this kind of stuff is weirdly interesting to me. And so as we get into this, one of the things that I would like to do is also do an analysis of how our departments stack up with regard to number of employees. What is our structure? How are we structured in comparison to other jurisdictions our size with our number of population? Not larger cities like Asheville, but places like ours. And so I want to do that. I plan on doing that anyway. But I would like you to know that that is my plan as we move forward. But I would like to have your input and hopefully consensus on including these funds for this option in the upcoming budget.
Selena,
Thank you, Selena. Doug?
how frequently is the living wage updated for Humboldt County?
It's my understanding that it is updated annually.
So I don't have a calculator for me, but it jumped almost $2 an hour in 1 year.
That's correct.
Percentage wise, somebody can tell me probably what that is, but, and follow up on that same question is, I don't think you probably have it tonight, but, based on the recommendations from Mr. Hill, do you have a feel for where we would stand in the living wage category? It was about what it is for the ones that are most likely to be affected.
My thought is that we are pretty close in most positions. That would be my thought, just having spent time looking at our salaries and wages and budget. I don't know that I can tell you that we're 100%, especially at that 1770. That's a pretty substantial increase. And so my thought is we are pretty close, but I can't tell you right off the top of my head how many employees would not meet that. But I can certainly get it for you.
Well, also, for the hourly people, what is the, on the lowest grade, permanent employees, what is the annual salary compared to the ones you put up there before? The lowest one.
I'm not sure, Tanya, do you know that? Do you happen to know right now, or we can get it? 32,864.
So considerably below its
Yes, sir.
So Selena, question, when you said, I'm sorry,
no. Go ahead.
when you said you think we're pretty close now, do you mean under the current living wage or the new one that they proposed?
I think, as of right now, we are current with the old living wage number.
Okay.
And we're close, I believe, on the new 1770.
Okay.
But I don't want to say how close because I don't want to get that wrong.
No, I get it. That was just.
But I don't think we're as far off as we might think we are.
You made a comment earlier, maybe I misunderstood, but you said, January the 1st, 2023, you would hope to move up to the living wage.
Up to the 17th.
Where we needed to. That doesn't mean everyone moves.
What effect would that have if you put it in the current budget, which begins July 1st? Why wait another 6 months?
My reason for waiting for the another 6 months is to go ahead and get this pay plan adopted and into place and move into that. And so obviously if county council wishes to go ahead and go with that 1770 and we can get you those numbers, I'll make a note to get that for you.
I would be interested in knowing, because apparently that would be the lower end, and I wouldn't think it'd be that much difference, additional for the 81,000. My thought would be, particularly for the people with lowest end, is the inflation rate we're going, without getting into the details, but everyone has to have fuel and food and so forth, and the inflation discards those because they consider it volatile. They have to have that, so I'd be curious to see and bring that back before we decide on the 81,000, because I'd like to see it begin sooner than wait for another 8 or 9 months.
Okay. Certainly do that.
Nice. So one question, last year, we put in play the idea of performance compensation and gave the managers autonomy to award that. So how is that factored into all of this? Because really, we're just talking about the starting pay per position. We're not factoring that in, correct?
That's correct.
Or are we? So how does that change the picture here?
I would still hope that we would continue to reward based on performance. So my hope would be that we would continue that program. I think this last year, and you may want to talk to the department heads specifically about it, but from my perspective, that went very well. It went well from the standpoint of it forced us all to do a different process and to really focus on the value added for positions and for individual employees. So although it was a little painful for us to do a new process, I believe it was a good process.
Okay.
We have to remember that I can't remember what percentage we ended up with, but those dollars were put into place at different points of the year,
Right.
based on when that evaluation was completed.
No, I get it, and that's encouraging to hear. I guess my comment there is if we've had that in play and it's working, the effective pay in a lot of these positions is higher than you factored in, right? Because we have this performance component that gets paid out. So, it may not be baked into the hourly, but it affects their existing compensation, right?
I'm not sure.
It does, but it can, so it's not factored in on their base. So we've just got to remember that base salary is irrespective of what that merit might be.
No, I get it, but, in terms of if I'm an employee, if I'm looking at a position at Weaverville, and I know that their salary is at market or even just below, but they've got this performance system in, and I think I'm gonna knock it out of the park and do very well, then effectively my comp could be higher than market. But it's not baked in, which I understand. I'm just saying, we all need to remember that we have that approach built into our plan. We've been doing it for about a year now. So it's kind of an X factor here.
That is correct, but not everyone gets a merit
Agreed,
increase though.
and they shouldn't, not everybody. So.
Our town attorney is trying to get my attention here. I'm not sure if we have technical.
Probably not gonna be on camera, just a kind of a visual on that. Your base salary, your job, you drop in at your grade level. And then you've got the range within that grade level, and the only way to move within that range is your merit. And so
For
that's.
cost of living.
Cost of living typically moves the
It makes it whole
grades up, and so the only way to move within your range is your merit, if that helps. Explain.
Thank you. I
So
believe
that's what I
Councilman,
was trying to bring up is one of the things that I would see a problem here, which creates it to be very analytical and mathematical, and is what I would not want to see is 29 people get raises. Some of those raises are big, okay? And then that takes that person to a higher amount than somebody who's been here longer, and their merit has taken them up to a certain point, but now somebody who's been here less than 5 years, let's pretend, is making as much as the person beside them who's been here 8 years based on their merit. And that kind of stinks. That hurts morale.
It does. I will agree with you, but I will tell you that town council has, over the last several years, not gone with a plan that rewards for longevity. So when you're looking at the person who's been here, 10 years, and the person who's been here 15 years, our town does not reward based on,
I
It's
get
on
that.
time off.
I get that, but now what we're doing is we're rewarding an employee who's been here 6 months and possibly getting them up to a living wage of $17.80, which could make them at a higher place than somebody who's been here 6 years.
Right. Dave, would you like to come and speak to that? I'm not gonna do well enough of that, and you've done so many of these studies, you can talk
Now,
about this.
excuse me, Selena, if I could interrupt for just a moment. Councilman Nagel has had his hand up for some time. So David, if you could hold on for just a moment. And Councilman Nagel, could you make your comment?
Thank you, Patrick. So 2 things. One is a cost of living. So I'm not sure why we're talking of what it is per hour. Because that's not really what cost of living is. It's what's their W-2, what is their take home? So if somebody's making $15 an hour and we allow them to work 20 hours of overtime, what is their take home? What's on their W-2? So if you want to take $17.80, which I think is ridiculous, but we live in a ridiculously expensive place. I think 2 years ago it was $15.80. So I don't know that I trust Buncombe County's numbers. I don't know how you go up from $15.80 to $17.80 in 2 years. The question really is, who in town makes less than $17.80 times 2,080 hours? That's the cost. That's what the cost of living is. It's 37. And I don't like their number, but we'll use it. It's $37,024. Okay, so that's what we look at. If I'm looking at that's just my opinion. You take it for what it's worth. The second is we keep talking about inflation, which I find ironic. So 7% inflation. We have a lot of people in town that live on fixed incomes. So we go, let's give everybody a cost of living wage raise based on inflation. And the money's got to come from somewhere. So we're going to give it to the worker and give them a cost of living raise of 7%, and we're going to have to raise taxes. So the people who are on fixed incomes who just can't get a raise, can't go out and shop, their amount of money they have to go buy gas and milk and food just went down. So another guy can get a raise. So, and the third thing, and then I'll shut up. I've tried to be quiet most of this meeting is, I just had a meeting with the Manufacturers Executive Association in town, and obviously the town can't move, but nobody can hire. Okay. So all this study of, I appreciate all what he did. We already all know that in the private sector, nobody can hire. Okay. Every manufacturer in town cannot hire, and we're talking good wages. There are people out there that just don't want to go to work in this town. So, we may have to be smaller. Okay. Your staff, you may have to have less people based on the fact you're not gonna be able to hire. So you can't pay everybody 50 grand. Okay. So you go, what would it take to hire people in town? Minimum of 50 grand a year, $25 an hour. I know people who pay that are struggling to hire. So now take it and go, let's make our minimum wage 50 grand. A lot of people are going to leave town because they can't afford the taxes. Okay. So there's a lot of things in play, and hiring is one of them. So appreciate the conversation again. And I think we gotta be careful not to miss a lot of these other points. So thank you very much, Patrick. I appreciate you recognizing me.
Thank you, Councilman Nagel. And now, excuse me for interrupting you, Mr. Hill, would you continue?
Addressing the question about the 5-year employee, the longer term employee. The particular option that we've presented is designed specifically to address that employee salaries are established without regard to performance, without regard to any historical event. Their salaries are calculated to be at a particular place on that salary grade range based on their time in that position. So a 5-year employee or a 1-year employee salary is going to be calculated down at the lower end of that range. That employee who has been with you for 10 years or longer, their salary is going to be calculated further up in the range. So that the option that you have before you actually establishes employee salaries based on a mathematical formula, but it establishes at different spots along the range according to their time and position.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question?
So I think just to make sure everyone understands, if we were to adopt any of the recommendations from either Ms. Coffey or others, that we're still going to be going into a budget process soon where we will be considering normal annual increases for staff anyway. This would be as a separate, any kind of separate type of raise. So just to make sure I understand, we're talking about two separate activities here. What other questions or comments do council members have to help give Selena some guidance as she develops our budget?
I guess one comment, and Selena, I appreciate you bringing up the idea of right sizing, streamlining, however you want to determine. I think that's really smart. I think all the managers should be looking at that all the time because, you know, we live in a fairly predictable town from a lot of standpoints, and that's an opportunity to kind of right size things all the time and maybe have positions that pay more or at the upper end, but have fewer up and be more efficient. I would love for that process to have already been concluded when we get this recommendation, because we can do two things at once. Where I'm struggling is we're saying, okay, let's give you approval to make $181,000 more into the budget now. And then get ready, because January 1, you're gonna wanna think about another $2 an hour. And then, oh, by the way, I'm gonna go look at the structure, and we may find some things we should have done already, and then we'll start doing that then. And there's a lot of moving parts here, and I feel really uncomfortable with saying yes to any one of them. Well, saying yes to this right now, knowing that those two are in play. Just me personally, it's a comment. It has no reflection on the staff at all. Everybody does an amazing job. I think we have opportunities here to reward people even more. But I'm struggling with just reacting and then doing the thinking later.
So let me speak to that just a little bit. I plan on, as soon as possible, starting to meet with department heads and talk about the number of employees they have, talk about the structure, talk about the services they provide, look at that issue. So, you know, when I put that in there tonight, that wasn't to ask you if I can. I believe that's my job to do, and I'm going to do that. I also firmly believe, though, that it is my job and responsibility, and I value this part of my job, and that is to present a budget that I believe fairly addresses our human resources, and that means pay them. And so I will tell you that one of the things that I will do, that I'm hoping to do, and I would just simply like to have your support on it. You know, I'm not asking you to vote on a budget tonight, but one of the things that I do plan on doing is looking at the questions that have been raised tonight, looking at, I think it's a good point of, well, why are we going to go into the 1580 as our low point when we may be looking at 1770? So I'm going to want to look at the budget from the standpoint of where we are with the 1580, with where we are with the 81,000 that I'm recommending, but also where we would be with the 1770. And so you will see a budget that will have that information in it. It's that point in time where you can vote that you vote for the budget or not for the budget. But at this point in time, I believe it is my responsibility to you, to this town, and to our employees to put in the budget what I believe is appropriate. That may mean that we go back and we take a look at with Mr. Hill, that we go back and take a look at dropping out some of those larger jurisdictions that what I'll call outliers, that are skewing our numbers, or frankly, lower ones that are skewing our numbers and yet closer to where we should be as far as per capita. As you were speaking earlier. So I'm not asking you for a decision tonight. I'm not asking you to make the final decision I'm asking for your input and consensus that we need to consider this. And, I mean, if I look around the room and on the screen and I see, those council that's not here and I see you all shaking your heads, no, don't do it. I mean, I'm not the smartest gal, but I didn't fall off the turnip truck yesterday, and I know better than to put it in there then. But at this point in time, my goal will be to put that in there unless you tell me not to. I believe that it was a process that was very fairly conducted. The town has paid for this study to be conducted. And to not at least try to include it in the budget from my standpoint as manager I am obligated to give you a balanced budget. From my standpoint, it would be, I would not be fulfilling my duties as your manager to not put fair pay in the budget. But then again, you vote for that, you know, when you go through budget workshops and that sort of thing. So I'm not asking for a decision tonight.
Right, and absolutely, and what we want to do tonight is give Selena some guidance as she begins the arduous process of developing a budget and around that. So I'm going to just go over some things I'm hearing, and you all, council members, tell me if I'm off the mark here or if we in fact are giving Selena good advice here. Things I'm hearing are that the town council wants to ensure that our employees are making a living wage. So those employees are making below the 36,000, whatever it is figure, we probably want to see their salaries increased. That's one theme I'm hearing tonight. Another theme is we'd like to hear more about the pay structures that other towns like us have, and that would include pay classifications. Are there ways to make those more sensible or make them at least more like other towns of our size? And also I'm hearing that we want to maintain the merit-based pay increase system that we adopted last year. So those are three themes I picked up on this year, or excuse me, in this conversation. So if anyone disagrees with those, please let us know now. Otherwise, I think that gives Selena at least some a baseline to begin with. Now, having said that, what other comments do people have for Selena based on what we've heard tonight?
I'm mostly concerned about the people who are making the $15.80 an hour, because $15 an hour is poverty wage, to be honest. Nobody can be expected to have to work overtime to be able to make enough money to support themselves and their family. You know, if you're making $15 an hour, and I know it's a little bit more, $600 a week, $2,400 a month, where are you gonna rent someplace for $2,400 a month and buy gasoline and make a car payment and back to school clothes for the kids and lunches and groceries and gasoline and all that? You can't do that for $2,400 a month or $2,500 a month. I think the sooner we get to the $17.70 an hour, I'm in favor of that. And I understand we're talking about doing that in a year from now, but like Doug mentioned, why can't we do it sooner for the bottom people?
And I'm going to echo that. I agree with this. I'm very concerned. You know, we've had the firefighters, and especially with public works also, you know, these people, I understand they truly need to get us up to a certain level. But the higher up that you go, and then you look at a 9% increase versus a 2% increase, it really makes you say, let's focus more on the bottom. That's a feeling that I have.
Yeah, if my pay raise is 3% and inflation is 7%, I'm making less money than I was a year ago, and it shouldn't be that way for any of our employees.
So, Selena, I think what you're hearing is that there is a consensus that we want to bring our employees who might be below the new living wage. We'd like to see them brought up sooner than later. Does that sound accurate to everyone? No comment is a consent. So, anything else, folks? No other comments or questions? God, y'all are so, so easy this evening. So let me just reiterate the three themes I've heard, and please, colleagues, add on to this to tell me if I've misinterpreted. Selena, we think that implementing the new living wage system earlier than later is a good idea to make sure everyone's up to the $36,000 annual salary. We would like to hear what others, communities like ours have with regard to their pay structure and their pay classification systems. And you may want to exclude those outliers, both high and low, that you mentioned. And that we want to maintain the merit-based pay increase system that we adopted last year. What else, what expansions or ideas would others have to expand to those directions that were given to Selena? Great. I think we nailed it. Selena, do you have any other comments or questions?
Sir, thank you all for listening, and I appreciate the questions. We've got a list of questions here, and we'll get answers to those to you very soon.
And I am sure that as Selena gathers the information with regard to how we compare to other municipalities of our size, that may spark further conversation. But at least at this point, I think that have given Selena some general themes about things we'd like to see in the budget with regard to staff costs. Selena, do you feel like we've given you some information to help you?
Yes, sir, I do. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, well, unless somebody has any other questions or comments, can I entertain a motion to adjourn for this evening? No one wants to adjourn?
Doug Action made a motion.
Second.
All those in favor, please raise your hand. I see all hands raised. And that
I didn't raise my hand. I didn't raise
your
my hand.
Andrew. Andrew, do you have any other?
I'm opposed to adjourning.
Do we have to go through a roll call here, or can we just count the hands as 6-1? If the town attorney doesn't agree, I'm going with the hands raised 6-1. Thank you, everyone, for your input tonight, and thank you to the staff as well for the great job they do for the town of Weaverville. Good evening, you all.
Thank you, Mayor.